Good evening. Welcome to this month's webinar, Playing with Model Sentences, Fun and Useful Ways to Use Them in the Classroom. This webinar is presented by the North American Cambridge Classics Project and sponsored by Cambridge University Press. We are so delighted this evening to have two new presenters this evening, Michelle Ramahlo and Kyle Smith-Laird. Michelle has been teaching Latin to middle school students in grades 5 through 8 in Chappaqua, New York for 15 years. She served on the American Classical League Board of Governors for many years, and she's very excited to be part of our NACCP board. She lives in New York with her husband, her 2 kids, and her dog. And Kyle has taught Latin to grades 6 through 8 for over 20 years at a private school in Los Angeles. He has also written 3 books of original stories, reading material for the Cambridge Latin course 5th edition. He's currently working on a Roman murder mystery, a video game about dating, and a screenplay about Latin conventions. And of course, walking his dog Lucy, named after Lucia in CLC 5th edition. So we welcome you both, and we hope our audience enjoys both of you this evening and your presentations and what you have to share about middle school and model sentences. And as all of you probably know, we are recording this webinar. It will be posted on the NACCP website in a few days. And if you do need a professional development certificate, if you would just please email us training@cambridgelatin.org, we'll get a certificate to you very quickly. And on that note, we will let our 2 new presenters, Michelle and Kyle, take it away.
Thank you so much, Martha and Ginny, for asking us to do this and for hosting this. Kyle, I will control the slideshow as you tell me to. So if you want me to go forward, just say next or whatever you need me to do. So.
Well, let's start off with, model sentences. What good are they anyway? Kind of why we're here, right? And so I have 2 quotes up there that hopefully will give you some food for thought and maybe reinforce why they are good. Does anybody know the first one? And Ginny, could you tell me if someone in chat is like, because I can't see everything.
Yes, I'll tell them.
Would you
put it in chat?
Well, because it's hard for me to see everything when like chat is up and the screen is up and the window.
No, I'm asking, would you like them to write the answer in chat?
Oh, they can raise their hand. They can put chat up. I don't care.
Yeah, so far nothing.
No, okay. Well, I don't want to tax you too much because you probably had a busy day and it's almost spring break and you probably are at the end of your rope if I remember correctly. The first one is little. Try? Yeah, go.
Yeah. So is it a drop? Like carves out a stone not by force but by falling often, something like that?
That's correct. Yes, that's wonderful. Yes. And that was what I used to tell my students all the time. If you only look at these once, there's no point. You have to keep looking at them and keep looking at them. They fought me tooth and nail because, they found repetition boring. Which brings us to the next one. Does anybody know the second one? Repetitio est mater studiorum.
Is it repetition is the mother of eagerness or studies?
Yes, wonderfully said. Yes. And it's true. Like if you keep on repeating something, eventually, something's going to sink in. At least that's the hope. And so when I use the model sentences, like any tool, it's easy to use a tool if you keep using it. And for me, the model sentences were like the Swiss Army knife of tools because they did so many things for me. And being a teacher is hard. It's easier with tools. And so for me, the model sentences were a Swiss Army knife for me to like solve a lot of problems right at the beginning. Can we go to the next slide, Michelle? Yes. So I have a little kind of Mad Libs for you here. Model sentences, what can they do for me? So the model sentences show new blank and blank with familiar blank and obvious blank. So our first word is something that scares children, like the chupacabra, or not getting, you know, what they want. What is this word? This starts with G. Do you have any chatters? Sorry, yes. Should I give it to them, Michelle? Yeah, grammar, John. Yes, grammar. So it shows new grammar. And also word order. What is the word for word order? Anybody know? We're looking for syntax here.
Syntax.
Yes, syntax, good. Word order. With familiar, we're looking for a word from Greek here. It's like a mark in the clay. We're thinking of like Caecilius and Metella and Quintus. They're familiar.
Characters.
Thank you, characters. Yes, thank you. And with obvious, like things that are happening, like, you know, Clemens sweeping, Metella sitting, they're obvious what? Anybody know? Actions, yes, thank you. Thank you all for participating. Yes, good. So yeah, they show new grammar. They're a language, like they're an introduction to the language. But they also introduce what kind of details for the blank and the springboard for deeper blank. And there are probably a couple answers for this. So here we're looking at like, you know, the togas, or we're looking at like the glass blowing. What kind of details are those? Anybody know?
Cultural.
Thank you, John. Cultural details, excellent. And they provide details for the blank, which is the word we use instead of chapter.
Stage.
Yes, John. I saw. Yes, I saw John mouthing it. Yeah, stage. Good. And a springboard for deeper. There's kind of two answers, I guess, for this one.
Comprehension.
Yep.
Yeah. Conversation, comprehension, a deeper dive, like, you know, anything like, you know, to get into like what's really going on rather than just like the surface. And it may take you time, by the way, to get to that level. Like with my middle schoolers, they wanted to run through it the first time, but then as we went through it the second or third time, we would talk about it a little more. They may have questions after that. It was also a great way if they didn't understand something on a test, if we had done it every day, they knew the sentence that, you know, I would tell them that grammar piece and they'd be like, oh, right, I remember that in the book. So that's a way, if you keep using them, they're useful to you, you know, because you don't have to tell the student the answer, you can give them the clue that helps them get there. All right, our last two are preview changes for beloved. This is a repeat from number 1. Beloved, like Quintus.
Characters.
Thank you, characters. And to build what Alfred Hitchcock loved, other than being mean to actors.
Suspense.
Yes, thank you, suspense. I'm thinking primarily of stage 12 that builds wonderful suspense with the model sentences. Good, and the last one is a way to explore English blank from blank blank. So these are words, they're like the children. Start the letter D.
Derivatives.
Yes, thank you, John. Derivatives from blank. We're looking for a language here.
Latin words.
Latin words, good. Or Latin roots, good. Awesome. So these are the 4 things that a model sentence can do for you. And to me, that is like a Swiss Army knife. It's language, it's culture, it's, you know, the characters like arc, and as well as a way to like think about new English words. And you can do that like in one day, you can do it gradually, you can spread it out over your time. But like if you use the model sentences, they will really help your teaching, and they'll help your kids to kind of like absorb all this material. All right, I think I'm done with this slide. What's next? Michelle.
And if you're not convinced already by the math to use the model sentences in your teaching and to not just fly by them, skip through them, rush through them, the standards themselves, the actual proficiency standards for interpretive reading say that at the novice level, which many of our level 1 Red Book users would be, visuals are something that students require in order to make sense of the text. So just in case you weren't sure if model sentences were something that was important to do, even our national standards are asking for visuals to support students' learning. So really important to use those visuals to help students understand and make sense of the text. So when we get to stage 1, this is the first time our students have ever seen any of these characters before, and their conceptions of the characters are completely based on the model sentences. Their images of the characters come from the images in the cartoons themselves. The names come from the model sentences. This is the best way to introduce the characters. So in my class, I put the model sentences on a PowerPoint or on a Google slide and project them to the students. I wouldn't do 2 characters at a time. I just squished this on here so you could see it on the screen. I would have one slide with Caecilius, and we would read out loud to the students, Caecilius est in tablino. The students are hearing the Latin, they're seeing the picture, they're connecting the Latin that they hear, the Latin that they see with the picture that's depicted. So it's very clear that here's this guy, Caecilius, and he is in this place, tablino. There's not too big of a lift in the terms of the language. But then we can ask students in Latin, quid vides in pictura, quis est? You know, if we have the supports for those question words, like posters posted or even written on the slides, we can start instructing students in the language right away. This is also showing them language features that they don't even realize exist. Here's a nominative singular. Here's an ablative. We don't have to talk about them. We can, but we don't have to. The meaning is embedded in the picture and in the slides. Likewise, later on, we have Clemens. Here he is. He's working. So instead of having an est, we have laborat. So servus in horto laborat. What is Clemens doing? He's working. So we could ask it in Latin. We could ask it in English. But we're getting an idea of what these characters do and how the language works, how the word order is different. We can stop and focus on those things as part of a grammar lesson, or we can simply use this as an introduction to the characters. But as Kyle said, you don't have to do them once and then leave them. You can come back to them. So if you're introducing the characters as one class, that's your PowerPoint for one class. If you're about to start to talk about word order, this can be the do now for the word order conversation. And also, we also get cultural information right from the very beginning. So at the end of the slideshow, right before this, there has been Metella in atrio sedet, Lucia in horto sedet, Quintus in triclinio bibit, and then we have Clemens. And so one thing we can start to ask the students right away is, how is what Metella, Quintus, and Lucia are doing, sitting, drinking, different than what this character is doing? And we're trying to elicit, well, he's working. Well, why? Well, he's enslaved. So we're already talking about enslavement right from the very beginning. And this is a classroom activity that you can do as, you know, you could do it on paper. You can do it as a pear deck. I see Becky Bush is in the room here. Becky Bush, the pear deck queen. You can do it as a presentation. But the model sentences are there to help us introduce the characters, see language features from stage 1 right away. Kyle, anything you wanted to add about stage 1?
No, I mean, I used to spend a lot of time on the model sentences in stage 1 just so they really had them down. It drove them crazy, but you know, they ended up loving them by the end. So that's all.
Makes sense to me. Any questions or thoughts about stage 1, or just how we've used these in our classes, or how you use stage 1 model sentences in your classes?
Can I just say that in addition to teaching them about the Latin, you're also modeling how you're going to do all the stages, and you showing the importance of the model sentences will help them to take them seriously.
Thank you. So there's model sentences in stage 2, but we've chosen a few to focus on. So we're not going to go through every single stage, but we wanted to pick out a few to illustrate what powerful tools the model sentences can be. So the next one we turn to is stage 6. So this is the series of model sentences from stage 6. I think I left out 6 somehow, 5 and 6. I'm not sure how I did that, but just taking a look at these sentences, we have servi per viam ambulabant, canis subito latravit, grumio canem timebat, pestis clamavit coquus. Quintus per viam ambulat, juvenis clamorem audivit, canis clementem vexabat, quintus canem possavit. So I guess what I'd say to the group is, what do you notice about these? What would you use these for? What can you imagine using this series of model sentences for? I have ideas, of course, that I'm going to share, but I'm just curious, when you approach these, when you look at these, what are you thinking about? You can type in the chat or unmute and say what you think. Anybody notice anything jumping out at them right away?
May I answer? Is it terrible for the other presenter to answer? I mean, the obvious thing for me is that the verbs on the left side of the page are all imperfect and the ones on the right side of the page are all perfect, so that they see not only like the actions in process, but they see like, you know, the verbs like in a column. So like all of the you know, it's structured that way.
Okay.
So you can introduce them both and you can talk about them both because
So
they happen one after the other. Go ahead, sorry.
Good. No, so we're seeing the new tense being introduced in stage 6. So the verbs look different. Your students might notice that right away if you start looking at these. Why does that ambulat have a ba in there? They may not, but they might notice it. Anyone else notice anything about these that they think they might use? I can think of about 5 different purposes for this particular set of model sentences.
Sierra raised her hand. Sierra, go
Yeah,
ahead.
what do you notice?
Hi, everybody. I thinking about this story is a bit there's just violence happening. Like the dog is biting and Quintus is hitting it. And so maybe allowing students, if they feel comfortable producing Latin, to reimagine a happier story. Like maybe
Absolutely. Yes. Well, one thing I want to pick up on that you said, like there's multiple things in your comment. One of them is that this is telling a story. So our stage 1 model sentences didn't really tell a story. They introduced the characters, but this is an actual sort of story here, right? There's like a beginning, they're walking down the street. This dog comes along, he attacks one of them. Quintus hears the dog attacking and then beats off the dog. So it's a standalone story. It's separate from everything else that's happening in the stage, and it's its own standalone story. So that's another purpose to use them for. But then Sierra said, reimagining, like removing the violence out of this story and reimagining the story with a happier ending. So having students produce Latin modeled on the sentences that are the model sentences, using the model of the model sentences to help students write Latin too. So maybe you could even give them a blank, Quintus blank canem. Instead of pulsavit canem, maybe he does something else. So maybe your do now for that day is you have a picture of Quintus, you have Quintus canem blank, and then they have to fill in an action that's not beating the dog, right?
yes.
Another way to use this, let's see, let's check the chat. People always want to know where Quintus got the stick. Yeah, well, his arm, he's not carrying it, is he? Oh, no, he is. Maybe he's carrying it all along. I want to know that too now. I never noticed that. You know how we've been teaching for so long, we never noticed these things.
Yeah, number 7, it doesn't look like he's carrying a stick.
I know. Picture 7, no stick. Picture 8, you can't see it. Picture 9, suddenly the stick appears. He broke a chair along the way, I guess.
Ran into the protesters from stage 11.
Exactly. But let's zoom in a little bit. So I, with credit to Tom DiGiulio for this, look at how the enslaved men are depicted versus how Quintus is depicted. So here's yet another way to use the model sentences. You can ask the students this very question. How are the enslaved men depicted? They're being attacked by a dog. They're powerless. They're treated as helpless. You know, Cambridge has made a choice here. It's a choice. So we can we can question our book's choice to show these enslaved men as passive victims of dog attack versus Quintus, this active, heroic role, right? He's listening, he's coming to the rescue with his found broken chair leg, he's beating off the evil dog and saving the day. And the end of the model sentences said the slaves praised Quintus. I don't know if that made it on there. But we can question our book when we start launching into, and the cultural topic in stage 6 is slavery. So the model sentences are a good jumping off point for that discussion, but it's also a good jumping off point for questioning our textbooks choices. And also, it's the start of the Quintus hero arc, right? So Quintus is a hero for the rest of the entire series, and this is the moment where he's a hero. Now, your students notice the stick. My students called, I learned a new middle school word this year, they called Quintus snatched. Apparently that means attractive in middle school speak. So they said his jawline is very chiseled and he looks snatched. I'm like, is that appropriate for school? Like, is that okay to say? And they're like, oh yeah, it just means like attractive. And I'm like, okay. So new middle school word for you out there who don't teach middle school. But Quintus is very heroic and strong looking here in all of these pictures. He's not, a little boy sitting in the triclinium anymore. Like he's very adult looking here. And so they're starting this hero narrative in this particular thing. So the model sentences in stage 6 can go anywhere. You can tell the story on its own. You can talk about the grammar, the timebot versus timet, superawit versus superat. You can talk about character development. You can talk about slavery. I mean, all of these things are embedded into the model sentences.
Michelle, the picture that was on the slide before where the 2 enslaved people are walking down the street, I often think that's a place to unpack a little bit the difference in how what an enslaved person was allowed to do in some circumstances. Because
Absolutely.
if the kids only have a sense of hours, what we did in this country, they may think, what? And the same with, okay, the book may be depicting them as fearful, but assuming that they are fearful, why is that? Is it that they know that they still better not attack a dog because the dog could be somebody's, like looking at where they must be hesitant to be, too aggressive.
Right.
Because they're enslaved people.
Sierra, I noticed you had your hand up before. Were you going to say something about the power imbalance here?
Oh, no, I hadn't. I was, I think it was for the last slide, but I really appreciate also the prior comment. I think that that's really impactful.
I agree. Anything
Oh.
else you notice about stage 6 that anybody wanted to comment about?
I would also like to offer here, if you are thinking about declension, you could maybe offer the children more animals and different declensions for this story, like plug that in. And if you want to do noun adjective agreement and using these sentences, or if you want to do like sequence of tenses with older students, like it's already here. And I think there are just more ways to move these around.
Absolutely wonderful ideas. I mean, and these images are here. If you take off the captions, there's so many things you can do with the images. I mean, you've got some really great images here just to have students write about. So, do nows in the beginning of class. What do you see in the picture? Describe picturam. And they can write whatever they think of or whatever they see. Another thing I noticed, Sierra made me think about it, is, stage 5 is plurals and sentence 1 is a plural. Everything else is singular. So calling attention to the plurals in the first sentence. Kyle, anything to add about stage 6?
Just an interesting little side note for your students is that there are big wild dogs that go through the ruins of Pompeii. And as we were walking through it on our honeymoon, there were signs in every language you could imagine that said, do not get near, touch, feed, or annoy the dogs. They're wild. So there is probably a reason that this story exists.
Yeah.
Based in some truth.
Interesting. I did not know that.
Yes. And we saw them. They were big and scary.
Oh my gosh.
And I like dogs, and I was like put off.
Wow. So as I said, this story is a standalone. This doesn't support any of the other stories. The rest of the storyline in stage 6 is Felix coming to, rescue baby Quintus. But when you get to some other stages, some of the model sentences, this is stage 9, these model sentences actually parallel the story. I think it's called Ad Termas. Just forgot the name of the story. So if you want to provide support to go along with the text that exists in the text, you can pair these images with the text itself. You could use it as a pre-reading activity. Here are some pictures, and then read the story immediately afterward, because what happens in the story essentially happens in these model sentences. So it helps them be able to understand what's happening. And what is one of the longer stories that they encounter in the Red Book, they're getting longer and longer, and this one's a pretty long one. So these help understand the story. Likewise, the shopping story in the model sentences, which I didn't include, about Metella and Melissa going shopping, is also a stage 9 story. So some of the model sentences can actually be support for the story itself. These model sentences don't have a ton of cultural information. I feel like you could ask about, like, giving the, money to the doorkeeper. What activities might you do in the baths? Like throwing a frisbee, obviously, is something that not frisbee, sorry, I called it a frisbee. A discus is something you could do with the baths. That there's statues, it's decorated, you can see the guys outside. So there's a few things, but I think that first story in stage 9 is really the place where the cultural information comes in. But some of the stories have little drawings that support them in the model sentences, and this is just an example of that. So I like to put these pictures side by side with the text to support my students' ability to understand it. Does anyone else use these? I know we've got some unclad people, and sometimes this stage is a problem for some schools. Like they will, censor out the men in the background or whatever. So putting it on your big screen may not fly in your school, but your cultural contexts and what you can and can't show. So just, a note about these model sentences, they can be a little risky. Anybody want to chime in or comment about stage 9? Has anyone had trouble with their schools and these images?
Way back when, I had a parent upset, but it was, more that she was super, super conservative and didn't understand that what was normal in our normal for them wasn't normal for her,
I've had students upset, like not upset, but they didn't want to look at it. So I said, put a Post-it over the part you don't want to see. So
that's a good idea.
We've used Post-its also, and it's typically the students who want to put it on there, which is, I support that. So
I do too. Like you can choose what you do and don't want to see. I'm not going to force you to look at that. But it is there, and it's also a cultural piece. Like, they're not wearing clothes, like that's what they did. But some students don't want to see that, so you can cover that up. So moving on to stage 17, the model sentences are getting a bit longer here. So if we think about stage 17, we're in Alexandria now. We've left Britain. There are, of course, wonderful, we have new characters in stage 13. You would introduce them probably in the same way that you would the stage 1 characters. But we didn't include that because we talked about character introduction already. So we have this long series of sentences. This is a pear deck. So it's an interactive presentation app that you can use. You can present things and students can type on the presentation itself, and without interfering with the presentation. So in a pear deck, you say translate the underlined sentences. The students can type in a little chat bar the translation of the sentences that are underlined. So here, obviously, the grammatical feature is genitive is being introduced. So when the students are typing, they type many soldiers were proceeding through the streets of the city. If they pick that up, or the city's streets, they may not pick it up the first time, but you're introducing the concept of it. Some may notice those endings, some may not. So this is a good place to talk about the language features, reinforcing other grammatical concepts that have come along noun adjective agreement. But I like to think about what the last line says, milites Romani urbem custodians. So what type of soldiers are these? Why do you think they are in Alexandria? So students don't typically know a lot about Greek and Roman history. They know the overview, the basics. So they're not necessarily thinking about colonization, soldiers occupying places. I mean, they may know about some of those things, especially from American history, but this is a good place to start talking about it. And without getting too much into it, you can start questioning why Romans might be there and what are they doing there and why would they send soldiers there and what do you see in the pictures. So it's a good way to start talking about the power dynamics between the Romans and the Greeks and the Egyptians in this location, while at the same time introducing new vocabulary and grammatical features. And here we are with our friend Quintus again. So another thing that might be cool to do is to go back to stage 7 and start with the picture of him saving Grumio and Clemens. Maybe something from stage 12 where he heroically fights his way back in, you know, or actually he doesn't do anything, right? He's just off doing nothing. That's Clemens. But Clemens is here too. So we're seeing character development of our characters. Clemens and Quintus are both here. The model sentences don't give away that that is Clemens, but we can look at the picture and think about it. In this particular example, I'm not even asking my students to deal with the text. We've done that in a previous activity. I'm just asking them to look at the picture. So the pictures are a rich source of information too. So like what's happening here? Why do they look so, 5 o'clock shadowy? Like who is that guy? Why would Quintus be traveling with somebody else? So this is plot development, character development, looking closely at images that the book is providing. I just love the stage 17 model sentences. They are so rich with information. And I mean, that's not even including the very detailed information about the lighthouse at Alexandria, the harbor. There's so much great stuff in stage 17. And again, in my class, I'm mostly projecting these. I'm not typically writing them on paper or giving them like translation assignments about this. I wouldn't ask them probably to translate this whole thing, maybe just a sentence or two, or think about the meaning, but other people do it differently. And I think those are great ways to handle these. Kyle, did you want to add anything about the model sentences in 17?
Only that this slide is really great. And like it tells that story about them arriving and they look like they've been dragged through the ocean. But I also like to tell my students, because the last story in 16 is when Quintus gives Clemens his freedom. And you see here that Clemens is in his toga. And I think that's kind of an important thing to point out to the students, because he's now a full Roman citizen. That's all.
Awesome. Well, and that, of course, launches into Clemens's character arc, which continues on through his shop and everything in stage 18. Does anyone use the 17 model sentences in a different way, or how have anyone approached any of these topics in their classrooms? Comments, thoughts, type in the chat, unmute.
I agree with you. I'm sorry. I agree with you with the pictures. I think are great. I just spend a lot of time on the pictures because it just shows so much, and we don't necessarily worry too much about the text until after we've really looked at those pictures a lot. So they are really, really well done.
Absolutely. I totally agree. I mean, this could be also just this picture alone with the text removed can be, what do you see in the picture? And the students could start naming things. Donkeys, Asini, Servi, Mercatores, Feminae, Ancillae, Milites. So just getting their vocabulary knowledge activated, thinking about what they see in the picture. Totally agree, John. Absolutely. The pictures are a great source of classroom activity, Latin activation.
Nora Kelly says she sometimes shows clips from the movie Hypatia.
Ooh.
I did not know there was a movie Hypatia.
Or
there's also a TED Ed video.
or type us more. Now we're all curious.
You know, you could also, if with your idea of taking the sentences off, you could almost help them generate, not write them, but generate a lot of what's going to be in the sentences from what they see.
Absolutely.
Or in that first sentence, Alexandria S. Orbs Turbulenta, and then say, so what do we see? And you would do some of the construction along with them. Yeah. Nora says it starts Rachel Weisz. It has great shots of what Alexandria would have looked like. Very rowdy. Some parts you can't show.
like all the great movies about the ancient world. Some parts you can't show. I'll have to look into that. Thank you for the recommendation. I appreciate it. Oh, it's called Agora. She says the movie is called Agora. Agora.
Okay.
Pronunciation. Okay, so moving on to stage 31. I'm going to mute for a second and let Kyle take over for a moment.
All right, so when we get to stage 31, by now the students have figured out what these model sentences are probably all about. You're in unit 3. It's not a surprise what's going on here. So, your job here would be to help them to see the connection between the phrase in phrase 1 and how it is a little different in 2. And I think this is done really, really well, the way that it's laid out in this book. So in the first slide, you have dies iluscus gebat. Sorry about my pronunciation. It's very dry here. And would someone be so kind as to translate that lovely sentence that I mangled?
Preferably out.
The day was growing light.
Excellent, good. And then in phrase 2, you have the same words, but they're slightly different. We have da iluscescente. Oh, sorry, it's been a long time. So you see those 2 words and you want the students to kind of make the connection. So would anyone have an idea about how you would help them to do that with that grammatical piece? What are the ways that you do that? Does anybody have an idea, a thought? Do you talk about the ablative? Do you talk about participles beforehand? I mean, if not, you can just tell them, it's like a way of rephrasing what they said before. Revisit 21 model sentences is a really good idea. Thank you, Nora. Good. So you have the verb, which is actually, you can talk about participles if you haven't already. I forget where we are in 31. And then you can talk about how they're the same case. You can talk about the ablative. And then if you're ready for it, you can talk about the ablative absolute. And I guess my teaching style at this point would be to go through what an ablative absolute is for the students, because it seems like this big daunting term. So often I would go through examples and I would have students come up with examples of ablative absolutes we have in English. My favorite being, that said, which is a great one. Does anyone else have a wonderful English ablative absolute that they would like to share with us that they use to demonstrate the ablative absolute in English? God willing?
Well, I would go back to what John said earlier and look at those images.
Yes.
Compare those 2 images before you even begin to talk about the language. I mean, by stage 31, kids know that this is where the new language feature appears. But look where the sun is and the buildings in the picture on the left versus the sun and the buildings on the right. And let them tell you in English what the difference is. And then take it from there. So I think that would be the starting point.
Nora also says that she goes back and revisits stage 21 models and demonstrates how those sentences can be turned into this kind of a construction without naming it. Oh, an ablative absolute construction. And then she says in parentheses, without naming it.
Yes.
And John has shared with us weather permitting.
weather permitting is a great one. Well, good. You can also talk about some of the cultural things. You could talk about the people who are working by the river, the Sakiari. Then they might be able to make the connection based on the thing that they're holding by the river. And since I live in Los Angeles, we have a port and harbor here. So, it's something we can go and visit. So it's nice, if the students really have an idea of what that is like. If you're, geography permitting here. So I also like to point out that quite often they use the genitive in a prepositional phrase, and it's right here. So in ripa flumis, we just saw this almost the same construction in stage 17. So there is like that consistency in Cambridge where they have that construction that the students will see over and over. And I really enjoyed that, because once they had learned it, it was like, oh, right, that's that structure, or that's that thing again. Does anybody else have anything they would like to add other than, I feel like the ablative absolute is laid out very well. And even if they don't understand what the word is or the concept is, they understand like what those words mean in a general sense. And you build from there. Although hopefully if they're in unit 3, they probably are doing a little bit better than that. I taught middle school for a long time, so.
Can I ask?
All right.
Nora's been typing in the box, but Nora, could you speak to how does that work with your kids in stage 21? Would you mind unmuting and telling us?
Oh, sure. All right. Am I unmuted? Sorry, my allergies are really bad, so I hope I sound okay. No, I just go back. What is it like? Faber ab architecto laudatus, right? And then I just say, Latin likes to really compress things, and you can have it Fabro laudato and kind of say the same, compress it some more. And I just go through and kind of just say it and have them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, if that makes sense.
It does. It does. So by the time you're done with that, then when they see them all throughout 30, whatever stage 31, they will be pretty comfortable with that structure.
Yeah, I guess what it is sort of like you're in 31, and I think these are really good model sentences. My students always find them very easy to grasp. But then it's like, oh, stage 21 is familiar, and now it's really easy, but it was sort of hard when we did it. So that kind of also gives them the boost. And just to see that, I don't know, that it's connected. Sometimes they don't realize how everything's connected in Cambridge.
That's why they need tour guides, AKA teachers. I think it's really cool, the thing with the sun. How the sun just, whoever thought this one through really thought it through, and like Michelle said about or you said about the stick, I've taught it for a number of years before I ever noticed that it was that cleverly set up.
This would also be a good time, to talk about derivatives. You have iluscente, which would be, a lovely verb for people to come up with, derivatives from, or even fluminous. I mean, doesn't have that many, but so there's a lot that you can kind of pull out of these, starting with just the images themselves. And I think that's also a good introduction. This is the beginning of the Rome cycle. So it's, we're starting a new thing, and it's like the new day is starting. So it's a lovely kind of like what's happening in, the story is happening, grammatically as well. All right, good. Does anyone have any other questions, comments? Stage 31 seemed to be a popular one. I didn't want to miss it because teachers seemed to really like, the model sentences of 31. No one. All right. I think there's still one more slide. Is it the cultural details that we just went over? Well, would you mind if we went back to the stage 9? I wanted to go to just point out one or two things. Thank you so much. Here we go. So in the top middle where we have Quintus servo pecuniam dedit, if you notice at the top, between the arches, there are all these lines in the ceiling. Does anyone know what those lines are for by chance? They served an architectural purpose.
You mean like the square lines? Like this square that's up here? Or like the stripy lines?
Like arcs.
Okay.
Yeah, the arcs. Does anyone know what those were for?
You mean the ridges, are they for the condensation to go down?
Yes, so they don't trip on your face and your head as you're walking through the bath. So they would funnel all the condensation down and collect it so it could be recycled into the baths. I found that really fascinating that they put that much time and thought into the bath, like in the architecture, to make it a pleasant and comfortable place for you to be. Because as you might imagine, having cold water dripping on your face is unpleasant. Good.
Can I ask a question about how do you handle the introduction of the dative here? Do you ask questions about the sentence? You know, and the fact the first one has two in it with term month, and then you come again and you're going to need to use two in a different way, maybe. So how do you guys handle that?
I think with, the second image, it's pretty clear what Quintus is doing. You can ask, who is Quintus, and they'll probably recognize him because he has the same outfit on all the time. That they can probably figure out, like, he's handing him something. You can point it out. It looks like a coin. And they usually put it all together. And then you can start asking them, like, why does Serwus become Serwo here? So and if they figure it out, then you can ask them, well, do you think you can flip it around so it's the slave giving Quintus money, to see if they can, like, start figuring out how the endings work. So and that was sometimes fun after, like, I didn't do that the first time because my middle schoolers, they were very anxious the first time. So, but once they got familiar with it, then we could play more games with it, or change the verb or change the direct object. Somebody was mentioning the same thing with, like, the stage 6. I can't remember her name, but, like, it was a really good idea. Yes, with, like, just changing out the words, because there's a lot of, like, third declension accusatives here. It would be nice to have some, like, second or first declension, because we haven't gotten to fourth or fifth here. Well, good.
So
I guess my question, Michelle,
go ahead. Well,
go.
See, I don't usually actually ever have the model sentences with all of the slides, all of the images together. We only did that for the purposes of this presentation. But looking at these in a grid, it's making me think of playing a game with these images, like some kind of, like, slapping game or something. So you could play fly swatter with the images, take out the picture or take out the words, and have, like, call out a vocabulary word that one of the images might illustrate. So you could say, Audiwit, and someone has to hit the image with Quintus listening or something, or Latrawit, and someone has to hit the image of the dog. I don't know if I would actually want to hit, like, my smartboard. Maybe not the best idea, but I have never actually done anything where I compared the images side by side at the same time. I usually am isolating them to focus on a particular thing, but I'm now inspired. I'm going to create a game. I'll send it out to you guys. I'll create a game that is an image search where you can, like, play a game or matching or some kind of picture matching with these images. I've never done that before, and just seeing them all laid out like this kind of made me think about that.
What if you instead of having them slap it, what if you leave the numbers or put a number under each one, and you, like, have the kids either hold up the number of fingers, or if you give them pieces of paper with 1 to 10 on it, they have to hold up.
Absolutely. Or if you could print them out and have them do, like, a bingo on on paper, you would have people print them out and do a bingo with them or something. That might be a fun activity. Does anyone do anything like that already? Like, play games with the model sentences? Any model sentences that you have? Does anyone do a game type of thing?
I may have some old Kahoots that I created a long time ago. I can, like, we can share it with you guys later. Like, you can look me up, Magister Faber. I'll put it in chat.
In terms of the fly swatter thing, one thing that I learned from my Cambridge workshop many years ago was to print it out and have the students work in pairs, and they just put their finger on the picture, and that would work, right? Because they'll keep each other honest.
Yeah, or you can also do, some people, I think Joe did one where he kind of made them miniature fly swatters with tongue depressors with an image on the end of the tongue depressor. I think he did butterflies or something. So the kids still got to slap, and every 2 people work together. To your point. Becky Bush.
I was going to read what she said. Are you going to read it?
Please.
Becky said in the chat that she has put the pictures and the sentences in a Flippity to make a matching game. So Flippity is that generator activity, like app that's online, and you can do randomizers or name pickers or whatever, but she uses it to make a matching game, and that's a really great idea. I have not done that myself, and I think that's a really wonderful, thoughtful way to do it. It gifts you more mileage out of the model sentences. And why should we be drawing pictures when these wonderful pictures already exist? There's no need to reinvent the wheel here.
You have another thing to do as you get farther along in the course is to put some of these pictures up and see if they can remember the sentence or some of the sentence, especially if you're introducing some grammar language point that's connected. You know, kind of like what Nora was saying about with the preposition, the participles. I was even thinking if you wanted to do a little bit on the present participle before you're going to do the ablative absolute, because a number of those are, that form.
So I was just going to go back to your question about the model sentences in stage 9. I actually use these as the notes themselves. Like, these are my notes for class. I take out the ones that don't have datives. And so when I introduce the dative, it's the picture with the sentence and a question about to whom is Quintus giving this money. And so every time they're sort of focusing in on the meaning of the dative, and the form too, but so these are my actual notes in class, the images and the sentences together with a question focusing in on the language features. These are my notes. So that's when I introduced the concept of dative, like we go through the story to understand the story, but then when we focus in on the language, these are the notes.
You illustrate with these, right? Is that what you're saying? Oh, good, Becky. I was going to ask you about the game. I'm glad you have the link there.
Would you be okay if I clicked on it to show it? Okay. Hang on, I'm going to stop sharing to see if I don't want to mess this up. Hold on. Okay, I'm going to share my screen again. So created by Becky. This is a matching game. Graecos dicet, nos Graeci sumus sculptores, nos statuas pulchras facimus. I accidentally clicked on the match right at the very beginning.
Becky, do you have to mix these up? Or is this your template one? You can speak, Becky. Yeah, try to see if the next two are in order too. Okay.
No, there are 2 images. So we have some people. Oh, this is from stage 10. Nope, that didn't match. Oh, this
you need the one with the water.
Exactly. This watching actors, right? This is a great activity, Becky. What a clever, wonderful thing to share. Thank you so much for sharing this.
I like the idea.
She says it randomizes them each time it loads. That's a really great idea. So I'm going to stop sharing. You guys have the link for that, which is super great.
Yeah, and Becky said that it randomizes them each time it loads. So yeah, that's a lot of fun.
So Becky, I'm going to ask you one more question. Did you cut and paste the sentences in, or did you type them in?
She said she typed them.
That takes a little more time. I'm just thinking teacher's time, yeah. But at least when you put things in, at least when you put that effort in, usually you get to use it more than once,
Absolutely.
Does
So what are
anybody...
your plans? Sorry, Jenny, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just wondering if anybody has a favorite set of model sentences that you guys didn't talk about and has any thoughts on those. Or a challenging one.
Yeah, that was my question. Or a set of model sentences that you don't really know what to do with or how to get started with them.
Are you talking to me and Kyle or the group?
Yes, the answer is yes. Anybody that wants to answer.
I am always disappointed by the stage 8 model sentences. I want them to have way more gladiator stuff in them than they actually do. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to use these to talk about gladiators. And then I get to them and I'm like, doesn't have anything here. Like, this isn't really what I want. So it's not about like the fights or the murmillos or anything like that. It's just sort of random plural things because the focus is on the plural. So actually I do use them as the grammar, like those are the introduction to the notes. But as far as the cultural information, I'm like, come on, gladiators are so good. Like this is a missed opportunity. So I always feel sad about that one. So I actually don't use the model sentences as a cultural introduction to stage 8 because I don't think they don't do what I want them to do. Tracy says she's in book 1, stage 8 now with your Latin 1 class. Yeah, I actually haven't even used them yet in my, I'm also in stage 8 with my 6th graders and I haven't used them yet. So I'm not taking my own advice here. Nora says she likes the stage 29 model sentences. Can anyone describe those? I don't teach in that particular book.
Well, if Nora doesn't want to talk, I'll tell you that there's a wonderful showing you the different parts of you're talking about the form, right? And the town, you have the capital at the top of the hill, and the sentences are at the beginning of the passive, and they really do a very nice job of contrasting that, kind of like what happens with the imperfect and perfect. It's one of the ones I think does the job very well. Because there seems to be some where they really do help you teach the kids more than just the form, like, the imperfect and the perfect. I thought you were going to ask back with stage 6. One of the things that you can look at is, well, how does the pictures illustrate continuous action and stopped action? You wouldn't use those terms with the kids, but that idea of what's the difference between what the imperfect's telling you and what the perfect's doing.
Let's look at that. I'll show it again so we can see what you're talking about.
I never use the PUM. I just don't want to go there with the kids. Okay.
So here's the stage 6 model sentences. And Kyle did bring up the difference between having the bas on the left-hand side and the, perfect on the right-hand side of these grids. But then Jenny is saying that the pictures themselves are showing a continuous action versus a sudden action. Is that what you're saying?
I mean, to a degree, you could argue you can't tell how long the dog's barking, but it's just that idea of what would, these guys are tootling down the street and then suddenly something happens, But if you look at the one with Quintus stopping, walking down the street and then stopping, that kind of pulling the action to the one thing.
Absolutely. I mean, even looking at them now, we as teachers have to get these lessons out, and so we all have so many preps and so many classes and we just are like, okay, model sentences, but it's hard. I don't ever take the time to really look at them super closely on a regular basis. And this moment has forced me to stop and look at these for this wealth of information. And I'm like so grateful that we have this resource in our book. I just feel like having these visuals for our students with this language support with it, the vocabulary introduction, the cultural information, like whoever made these is a genius. Like, thank you, Cambridge writers of the past, for making these. I hope they will continue in the 6th edition.
Oh, model sentences didn't go anywhere.
Well, and I find it interesting that you look at each picture individually and show them as a PowerPoint. And for me, the model sentences always told a little story in themselves. So we always looked at the model sentences as a whole and read them as one big group of sentences that were illustrated. So it's just a different perspective.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, if we thank you, Kyle, Michelle, very much for this evening. As we said earlier, we will post this on our YouTube channel in a few days. And if any of you need a certificate, if you would just email us training@cambridgelatin.org, we'll get a certificate out to you as quickly as possible. And we really appreciate you being here this evening. Thank you so much. And if you have any questions for either Michelle or Kyle, do you two want to put your email addresses in the chat?
Thank you for being such a participating group.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much. This is very helpful.
Oh, good. Kate Corsley's clapping away for you guys.